In this video, we're going to show you to install the lower control arm on your Cadillac Escalade located on the bottom side of your front suspension. Jack up and support your vehicle, grab the wheel, go ahead and rotate it, and what we're looking for is for the notch on a center cap to line up with the notch on the wheel itself. Use a pry tool such as a screwdriver or something similar and get in there, pry that center cap off and set that aside. Using a 22mm socket, go ahead and loosen and remove all of your lug nuts. Once you have all the lug nuts removed, grab that wheel, remove it, and set it aside. Now with the hood open over here on the driver's side, this is where the upper portion of the strut area is. Now there are 3 nuts that hold the top portion of the strut in place. There's one underneath this harness retainer right here. You can pop that right up and off. There's another one on the front side right here. Slide that off and you can pull that harness aside. And here are the 3. 1, 2, and 3. Now, if the hardware looks rusty, go ahead and spray that down with some rust penetrant. Let that soak for a little bit, just those 3. And then we'll come on back and we're going to loosen these nuts about halfway up the studs on all 3. Now on the bottom side, we have our lower control arm here, and here is our spring and shock assembly. Now I'm going to go ahead and spray this down with some rust penetrant. You may or may not need this, but we're in the salt belt area, so we want to make sure that we can let this come out as easy as possible. Let that soak for a little bit. After you let it soak, come on back, just kind of wipe things down a little bit. We're going to use our 16mm socket to go ahead and loosen these bolts. I'm going to slide this with our pry bar. Our next step is we want to go ahead and loosen and remove the inboard bolts holding the axle to the front diff area. Now if you grab the wheel, you can rotate it and you can see a series of these bolts going around. Ideally, what I'm going to do is I'm going to wipe down the outer flange, and I'm going to use a crayon or a marking crayon here, and I'm just going to mark both the inboard and outboard flange, because my plan is to make sure that when I reinstall this axle, it goes in the same exact area. We can use our 15mm with a swivel and an extension. I'm going to loosen and remove all of these bolts. Just go ahead and rotate the brake rotor. And go ahead and remove that last bolt. Reach in there and you're going to pull the flange out towards you. and then drop the axle down. On the axle side here, you want to get and remove the axle nut. This is a 35 millimeter. Loosen and remove this. I want to go ahead and see if that will slide in. And it could be stuck. So what we're going to do is we're going to use this type of mallet. It's called a dead blow hammer, and you're going to hit this here, tapping this in. At the same time, you want to reach around the backside and grab that axle, because what we're going to do, I want to position that so we can pull this out. Tap that in. We're going to use a 14 millimeter wrench on our sway bar end link and a 14 millimeter deep socket and extension on the upper. We want to loosen and remove this nut. Now some of these sway bar end links, they can be designed slightly different, but they serve the same purpose. So yours might be a little bit different. It might be an all plastic design. Ours is an all metal design. Now normally when you remove that nut, you can separate the bushing, and then on the bottom, the bushing and the washer are separate, and then this is a separate sleeve. Then we have a separate washer and a bushing. But when we're spinning the bolt, the sleeve is rusted to the bolt itself, and we just can't get it out. So this can happen. In that case, you're gonna have to replace it. We're gonna go ahead and cut this right out, dispose of it, so we can continue with the job. Now that we cut it, we can simply go ahead and discard that. Let's go ahead and loosen and remove the bolts from our control arm to the chassis itself. I'm gonna use an 18 millimeter box wrench on the bolt side and a 15/16 socket and ratchet on the inside. There we go. Now I'm just gonna remove the nut and the washer. Let's go ahead and move to the rearward bolt. On the back side here, I had to switch. I went to a 15/16 box wrench due to the clearance for the sway bar here, and an 18 millimeter socket for the bolt side. Now we go ahead and tap this bolt out. Just maneuver that around the axle here. Go ahead and set that aside. Let's go ahead and move the forward control arm bolt out. Now in most cases, the bushings in the arm will have a tendency to stick in the frame, but sometimes it won't. So be careful, don't stand underneath it. Stand back and away, because it may swing down. Use a pry bar. And we're gonna go ahead and work these out. So as we pull the control arm out of the frame, we're also gonna work and focus on pulling the axle completely out. So just watch for the axle, don't drop that. With this hanging down, we should be able to maneuver this axle out. And set that aside. Now on the ball joint side here of the control arm, there's going to be a cotter pin. Go ahead and bend those tabs out. Normally it's going to be just one if it was properly done. If not, you're probably going to have two tabs on here. You want to straighten those out. Come along the back side and see if you can grab that cotter pin and pull it out. We're just trying to get our pick into the eyelet of the cotter pin. And then pinch and rock. See if we can get that out. There it comes. There you have it. Use a 22mm socket to loosen and remove the nut. Now there's a couple different ways we can go ahead and separate the ball joint from the control arm to the knuckle. One is you can use a sledge and kind of whack the knuckle itself. We're gonna hit it on the front side here. It has a bit more clearance here for us to hit. Or you can hit the stud itself, but that can mushroom out the ball joint stud and cause an issue for it to come out. So what we're gonna do, give this a few whacks. Here we go, that is broken free. Grab that, pull that ball joint out, and remove the control arm. Now before you install the control arm, remove the ball joint nut, remove the plastic protective covering. This is strictly there to protect that boot. Do not install it. Go ahead and dispose of that. Let's go ahead and set this into the knuckle now. Drop that down inside. With that nut there, let's now go ahead and we're going to get our axle up and into the wheel hub and then push up the control arm into the chassis. Feed that in. Now in some cases you can use a jack for this to try and help you as a second set of hands. Wind this up. Before you install your bolts, identify the longer bolt goes in the back, shorter bolt in the front. Put the pry bar up between the control arm and the chassis. Go ahead and work that. There we go. Once you get both of those bolts in, install the lock washer. And the nut. Now both of the nuts are the same size, so it doesn't matter which bolt they go on. Okay, we have the two bolts in and we have our ball joint in place with the nut started. Let's install our sway bar end link here. So we have the bolt with a washer and our bushing. Next bushing, followed by our next bushing with washer facing down. Sleeve. Next one facing up. Line that up. Now we have our jack underneath. We're going to raise up our control arm here. Get our next bushing on the top here. Thread that down and in. Go ahead and tighten down your sway bar end link. Let's go ahead and torque down our sway bar end link to 17 foot-pounds. We're going to remove our jack. Just going to set that aside. We will be reusing that on our next step. Going to line up your shock. Get our bolt started. go ahead and tighten those down. Go ahead and torque these down to 37 foot-pounds. Tighten down the lower ball joint nut using a 1-inch socket. Now in our particular case, it seems like the ball joint is spinning inside, so we're going to go ahead and try and compress these two together. By applying pressure on the bottom of the CV axle and the top of the control arm here, we're able to push the ball joint down into the knuckle itself where it's a tapered seat, and it wedges it down to hold it. That way there you can go ahead and tighten that nut. So we're going to torque the ball joint nut to 37 foot-pounds. Now at this point, we're going to go 95 degrees, which is a full quarter turn, and then a little bit more. So get yourself positioned. All right, there it is. So we're torqued and we have our 95 degrees on there. Before we torque down our control arms to the chassis itself, we want to go ahead and compress our suspension to a neutral ride height. What that means is that you want to compress the suspension as if the vehicle's weight was on it on the ground. So if you want to, you could lower the vehicle down onto the ground with your wheel on it to get that. In our case here, you can either use a jack or a pull jack like this here and compress our suspension. And what we're looking for is we're going to compress this just to the point where the vehicle starts to lighten up on the lift. Let's go ahead and tighten these down. And do the same for the forward bolt. We're going to torque these to 129 foot-pounds. Once we're done torquing the inboard bolts, we can go ahead and lower our jack. Remove that, set it aside. Now let's go ahead and install the bolts for the inboard portion of our axle. I'm going to line this up. Now we had previously marked our flange here with a crayon to make sure everything lines up properly and nothing is distorted or changed there. I'm going to go ahead and get one of these bolts started and run it in as far as I can by hand. You can go ahead and grab that brake rotor and rotate that. That's going to help you get access to the remainder of these here. I'm going to continue to do this till we get all the bolts in. I'm going to go ahead and torque these down to 58 foot-pounds. I'm going to use a pry bar, go between the CV axle, flange, and bolt on the previous or forward mount. I'm going to repeat this process all the way around. All right, those are all torqued. Install the axle nut. Install a couple lug nuts. Use a pry bar here. I'm going to torque down this axle nut to 177 foot-pounds. Remove the pry bar. Going to remove our lug nuts. And we're going to spray down our brake rotor here to get rid of some of this dirt and grease. Now we're going to go ahead and snug these down. Do not over tighten them. Just bottom them out. When torquing these three nuts, it is extremely critical that these go to 37 foot-pounds. Going to install your wheel. Let's go ahead and get all of our lug nuts started. Once we get those started, we're going to come back and snug them all down. Good, and torque down your lug nuts to 140 foot-pounds. I'm going to try and do this in some sort of crisscross pattern. Grab that center cap, locate a notch in the center cap, line up with a notch in the wheel. Go ahead and tap it on, and you're all set.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.